सर का पीपीटी हाइड होगा तब आपका फोटो पूरा आएगा।
इसका पीपीटी
सर का पीपीटी
लाइव हो गया।
सर आपका पीपीटी अभी स्टॉप शेयर करिए सर।
ठीक है, कोई दिक्कत नहीं, लेट इट बी।
स्टार्ट कर।
So shall I start?
यस
Okay. So a very good morning, respected director sir, esteemed speakers, my colleagues, and all the participants present here. I, Samriddhi Singh, am delighted to welcome you all to today's online training program on ethical principles and practices for research involving human participants with environmental associated ailments. It is wonderful to see so many esteemed colleagues and participants joining us today, reflecting our collective commitment to advancing ethical research practices in the field of biomedical research. Today's training program focuses on the critical intersection of environmental health and ethical research. As environmental factors increasingly impact human health, it is imperative that research in this area adheres to stringent ethical standards. Our esteemed speakers will share insights into ethical guidelines, regulatory issues, and practical considerations, providing the tools needed to conduct responsible and impactful research. So thank you all for joining us, and I look forward to our discussions. So to commence this program, it is my honor to introduce our director, Sir Dr. R.R. Tiwari, who will provide the opening remarks and a brief introduction about our institute, ICMR NERE. Sir is a distinguished figure in our community, and his insights will set the tone for today's discussion. Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Samriddhi.
Thank you, sir.
To all the speakers and the audience for this webinar, which is a very important webinar on the ethical considerations of the human-related research. A brief about ICMR NERE. ICMR NERE, as you know, is an institute under the umbrella of prestigious Indian Council of Medical Research, which is in existence since 11/10/2010. The institute is mandated to work with the environmental health related issues, and so we strive to become the institute of excellence for cross-disciplinary research in the field of environmental health. And we envisage to be an institute of excellence in environmental health through biomedical research on the EH-related issues, through exposure assessment and mitigation and capacity building in the environmental health. And it is under the capacity building mission that we are holding the training programs time and again, and this is a part of that one. So we are ultimately researching the environment for the healthier lives. The thrust area which we are addressing is the all pollutions, air pollutions, water pollution, noise pollutions, then the climate change and its impact on health, gene-environment interactions and disease susceptibility, epigenomics, epigenetics, sustainable habitat and health, then exposure assessment, exposomes, exposure mitigation, and capacity building. And all these thrust areas correlate with the many SDGs of the 17 numbers which are suggested. Current area of work include climate change related health effect, built environment and health implications of built environment, water, sanitation and hygiene related research, the research on microplastics, either in environment or in human population, epigenetic markers of air pollution related diseases, development of biosensors, nanobiosensors, heavy metal toxicity, metabolomics, children's environmental health, environmental perspective of AMR. These are the current area where we are working. So if anybody is interested to collaborate, they can please contact. So in last 14 years of our existence, we are growing to be an Institute of Excellence in Environmental Health, and this team and these numbers speak about that. So thank you all, and over to Samriddhi.
Thank you, sir, for that enlightening introduction. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker of today's program, Dr. Roli Mathur ma'am, who will address us on the ICMR National Ethical Guidelines for Biomedical Research involving human participants. Dr. Roli Mathur ma'am heads the ICMR Bioethics Unit and is the scientific advisor for the DHR National Ethics Committee Registry in India. She is the member secretary of ICMR Central Ethics Committee on Human Resources as a National Ethics Committee. Her department is recognized as a WHO Collaborating Center for Strengthening Ethics, the very first one in WHO Southeast Asia region. She is the member of several WHO expert groups, namely Ethics and Governance, Ethics of Artificial Intelligence in Health, Clinical Care and Ethics, and etc. She is also a member of Forum for Ethics Committees in Asia and Western Pacific and serves as an international SIDCR surveyor of ethics committees. Her work over the years has revolved around building capacity for research ethics in India, developing national policies and guidelines in research ethics, networking and collaboration with stakeholders. She has edited a reference book titled Biomedical Ethics Perspectives in the Indian Context, which is a first of its kind book in India discussing research ethics issue from an Indian standpoint. Recently, she has been elected to serve as a chairperson for Global Network of WHO Collaborating Centers in Bioethics for a 2-year term. She is also presently appointed to serve as an external evaluator of the functioning of WHO Headquarters Ethics Review Committee. She was earlier acknowledged to be among the top women scientists at ICMR or International Women's Day in reference to her work done during the pandemic. We welcome you, ma'am, and we are eager to hear your insights.
Well, thank you so much. That was a longish introduction. Thank you so much. So before I begin, I would like to really thank Dr. Tiwari for giving me this opportunity and platform to speak about the National Ethical Guidelines. I would also like to thank Dr. Mishra and Samruddhi for making me part of this program. So I would like to be speaking about the guidelines, and I will also take this opportunity to share a lot of other ICMR initiatives in order to create awareness about what are the tools, the newer tools and guidelines that are now available, which can be of use to the researchers. So with that, I'll begin. And so this is an overview of the guidelines. And I like to thank our seniors, stalwarts who have really, over the past so many decades, helped ethics bloom at ICMR. So on the top, you see the photographs of chairpersons of ICMR Central Ethics Committee, who really guided ICMR in the development of various policy documents and guidelines. And in the second row, you see all the DGs of ICMR who have been supported.
This meeting is being recorded.
And as we can see that it was way back in 1980 that ICMR came up with its first guideline policy statement. So it has a very long history of strengthening ethics. And I feel fortunate to be the torchbearer for this and taking this forward. And that happy also to say that, globally, India has been recognized for its work in this area. So with that, and then I want to introduce you to this fact that every ethics committee in India is now required to register with the NATIC portal. So this is now mandated under the rules of the new drugs and clinical trial rules. So, and it also states that for every biomedical and health research that's carried out in India, researchers need to follow the ICMR ethical guidelines. So indirectly, now, since 2019, ICMR guidelines have become mandatory or binding by law to be followed by all researchers across the country. And all ethics committees are also required to register on the Department of Health Research NATIC portal. There is another portal which is called Sugam portal, and that is in relevance to ethics committees that review clinical trials. So there are these two portals that are very important for all ethics committees to make note of. The principles of ethics I believe sound very theoretical. Everybody knows them: autonomy, beneficence, non-maleficence, and justice. But since today we are talking in terms of environmental health, we have added two more, which is about sustainability of these efforts and also about respecting community values. Because when you talk of environment, it is not just personal, it becomes community, or it has to deal with people, populations. So these are the principles, but what is important is that how do we actually implement these principles in practice, in our regular research activities? Because we have all these principles and they are all part of the guidelines, but actual implementation on ground has not really been great. So what I would like to urge is that these principles are not for theory alone, but they are for practice. So when a researcher is building their research protocol, they must make sure that these principles are highlighted in the protocols and they display as to how these are going to be respected. For example, autonomy. So how do you take care of individuals, respect for them? So the protocol should not only talk about informed consent, which is there in most protocols, but then it should also talk about how their privacy and confidentiality is going to be safeguarded, or if some harm comes to them, how are they going to be covered for that harm? So these things should be part of the protocol. Similarly, beneficence. What kind of benefits would come out of the research? There is, of course, benefit to science or society, and that's the reason why we are doing research. But then also talking about how this individual who becomes part and parcel of your study, how he or she can be benefited, or how his harm or risk can be reduced. And then the principle of justice, in order to making sure that no particular person or group is exploited one against the other because they happen to come from maybe a lower socioeconomic group or less educated people. So everybody is the same, if on the same platform. So equal respect is what we should give. And also the individuals who become part of our research are also entitled to know the outcomes of the research, how these benefits are translated back to them, because number of times our research ends with a publication. So that's good. You need to publish your papers, but then how do these outcomes get translated to public health is what makes it more ethical. So every kind of biomedical and health research, and also if it is socio-behavioral research, we are doing a survey, you're just doing an observational study, even then, even those studies, or you're just collecting some data, or you're working on samples which have been stored before. So any such kind of activity which involves human beings or their sample or their data or any information related to them requires ethics review and requires all the ethical considerations. If you look at the national guidelines, these are the 12 sections that are there in the guidelines. The first 6 sections are more generic, which is about general principles, general ethical issues, responsible conduct of research, ethics committee review, informed consent, dealing with people who may be vulnerable. And the next 6 sections are more specific. So if somebody is doing a clinical trial or doing a public health research or doing a socio-behavioral study or genetic testing or looking at biological material or data sets or research during emergency and disaster. So the next 6 sections are more specific. However, I would urge that you need to go through the whole guidelines in order to really understand, because a lot of sections are cross-linked between each other. So in the first section, there are these 12 general principles, which are about essentiality. Is this research important? Is it needed? Or is it just a Me Too research and you want to do it just because you have to do something, so you're putting a proposal together? So there must be some relevance or need for societal values for the study. So that is the first and foremost principle. Then research has to be carried out by people who are professionally competent. It does not mean the PI alone. It means the PI and the co-PI and the study team. So basically, as we know, that research is very multidisciplinary and requires a lot of skills. And not all of us can have every skill. No human being is that perfect that you know everything. So we need to have a partnership. We need to collaborate with the right people, but make sure that there is professional competence for every kind of work, lab, clinical, field work, statistical analysis. So for doing a good quality research, you need a strong team, which is well qualified and trained. The people who become part of the research must voluntarily give consent. So it is not that they are coerced or forced upon. They are not influenced to agree. They are not pressurized. They feel free. They understand the proposal. They comprehend it. And then they are free to ask questions, and then they agree to participate. So it is a process. We no longer call informed consent as a form. We call it informed consent process because it's not just signing a form. Then looking at how benefits can be maximized. Is there a way to give some additional benefits? Is there a way to reduce the risk or harm? Many a times we say that, I'm only doing a questionnaire-based study. There is no blood draw and there's no risk. Or this is not a clinical trial. There's no intervention. So there is no risk. So I would like to tell you that risk could also be in terms of discomfort or harm. For example, you may be calling the person 3 times to the research institute or hospital or your facility. That means that person may have to take leave on 3 days or may have to spend money on transportation. So there are these other kind of risks and discomforts, which could be financial, which could be time, which could be legal, which could be social, psychological. They may be stressed. So all these kind of things count under risk. We must try to reduce them, do counseling or provide services so that as much as possible, we can take care of these discomforts. Then there should not be any exploitation of a particular person or group. Like I said, it should not be that we target a person or, do some procedures which lead to stigmatization or discrimination against a person. And the institution where research is being done has to provide all the wherewithal. So you should have the right kind of infrastructure, space, which is required, the right equipment for carrying out, and that is the institutional responsibility. And we also have a social responsibility in the way we conduct research, that we don't sort of, disturb the cultural fabric. We know we are a multicultural, diverse population with languages, cultures, religions, caste, creed, color. We need to respect that. And then the way research is done, it should be transparent, should be following the protocol. We cannot make amendments on our own. We have to be accountable for that. And if we are making some changes, we have to report it to the ethics committee and takes their approval. Then also ensuring the privacy and confidentiality of the identified information that we collect. How we are going to store it, with whom are we going to share it, or how is it going to be used in future? All these things should be part of the protocol. And also we have a responsibility. We can't say, this is ethics committee job, this is institutional work, this is sponsor's responsibility, and this is my PI, I will only do this bit. Basically, all the stakeholders who are involved have to feel responsible for a good conduct of research. And then environmental protection is a very important principle that was added in 2017 guidelines. And I think it is directly relevant to the Institute NIRE, because we have this responsibility of protecting our environment and doing the research in a manner that protects or improves our environment and resources. The general ethical issues discuss about, benefit risk assessment, how to carry out benefit risk assessment. Sometimes we think this is the work of ethics committee. Yes, it is definitely the work of ethics committee, but as researcher also, we need to carry out a benefit risk assessment beforehand, before we submit it to an ethics committee. Before you submit, you need to think what kind of questions the ethics committee will raise. So if you write in the protocol, what are the benefits, what are the risks, and how do you justify the benefits are in favor, it makes it much easier for the ethics committee, and they will not send you, revise this, revise that. They won't be critical. A lot of time we find there's a confusion back and forth going on between ethics committees. And basically, ethics committees also want good quality research, and the scientists and researchers also want good quality research. But still, they are not on the same page. So it's very important that researchers take care of all these concerns before they submit to an ethics committee. They make sure that privacy, confidentiality is going to be ensured. They write in the protocol, where is the data going to be stored? How is it going to be anonymized, or whatever is their plan? And then make sure how distributive justice is ensured, which means that how recruitment policies are going to be, who is going to be recruited. It's not just that we have this sample site, but how, which is the population, where will you go, how will you ensure that there is equitable participation and it is not discrimination against a particular targeted group. And then once your research is over, also how are you going to communicate back the findings or share the benefits with them? Is there any payment involved? Now, payment is a double-edged sword, because on one hand, payment is important to reimburse the costs, because the participant should not bear any cost of participation in research. If there are any additional tests or investigations or additional expenditure due to travel or others, then it is a responsibility that the project grant should cover that. But on the other hand, if this payment becomes huge, if it becomes like per visit, you will be paid 5,000 rupees. So it may become a undue inducement to participate. And therefore, whatever is the amount that you are proposing to share as payment for participation must be declared to the ethics committee, and the ethics committee will take a call whether it is reasonable. And you need to also justify in your protocol that why such a payment is needed or why not it is needed. And similarly, if somebody suffers from an injury due to participation, they must be paid for compensation, and medical management should be provided. So these are two different things. Sometimes we confuse between payment and compensation. These are two different things. Then conflict of interest issues. There are a lot of, because we are human beings, we have primary interest, we have secondary interest, we have tertiary interest. Our primary interest is research, but then secondary interest is we want to get a quick paper, we want to, have an award, or we know the person, we are members of ethics committee and the protocol is of our friend or my student, for example, or it could be my colleague or rival, so there are a lot of other things which can also influence on our decision making, and the decision making may become biased because of conflicts of interest. So it's very important that we recognize these and declare these, and so that they can be managed. Community engagement is again one thing which is often taught in principle. We only think about theory that, we need to engage with people, but then community engagement is a big responsibility. We need to build trust. And I think in Bhopal, we've seen that, there has been, because of some unfortunate things that have happened in the past, there is some erosion of trust. So it's very important that we focus on building trust so that the people trust us, what we are doing, why we are doing, because we are trying to do good for them. It is for them only. But then if they are not on board, if we are not engaging too much in community, with community, then there may be an apprehension on their part, or they may misunderstand our initiatives, which are actually for their benefit. So it's very important that we build good communication channels to communicate why we are doing, how we are doing, and take them on board. Maybe have them as members in the ethics committee or make them part of the study protocol. And these things cannot be done over, like one time. It's not a one-time activity. It's over a period of time that we build a rapport and build trust with the community. And that goes for everybody. Wherever one is working in whichever part of the country, they need to engage with the community on which they plan to do research. And also see that post-research access and sharing or informing them that, we did this and this was the outcome, whether it was positive or negative, or you want to do future research. These things should be communicated in a language and manner they understand. We do publish, and that is good. But publications are not read. The scientific publications may not reach the common man. So in lay language, we need to communicate what we have done. How is it going to be of benefit to them? Because it may not be direct benefit to an individual, but it may be to the society on a whole. So it is important to communicate that. Then about the storage of biological material and data sets, because often we collect samples or data and it's for a 3-year project. Now, after 3 years, what? If you have not taken consent, if you're not taken ethical approval, then basically you will need to destroy those samples and data sets. And since we all understand the samples and data may be important, very important, precious material. Therefore, beforehand, we must think about what will happen after the research is over. build better networks, collaborate with the right people on their clarity between the roles and responsibilities, and that will help to build better collaboration and do better quality research. And public health research and social behavioral research also requires similar this thing. So I think we're running out of time. Okay, so responsible conduct of research is about how a scientist can act as a responsible member of the society. The chapter on ethics committee is about how ethics committees have to be facilitatory, helpful, competent to do reviews in a time-bound manner and not delay research, because otherwise, there's a lack of trust between the researchers are complaining against the ethics committee, and it is very important that they have good communication with each other. Now, reviews are of various types. There are exemption from review, expedited review, and full review. So we must see what our research fits into full review or expedited or exempt, because number of times we think that every research has to go through full review process, but there is certain kind of research which can be exempted. The membership of ethics committee is multidisciplinary, we all understand, and that is to have the right perspective from all sides: clinical, non-medical, scientific, non-scientific, legal, social, so as to make a good decision. Then consent form has the elements which are given on the left side, but then consent form has to be in very simple language. It should be basic, language जो हमारी बोलचाल की भाषा है, जो हर जना समझ सकता है, rather than being very highly complex. Because you may be doing very complicated research, but doesn't mean that informed consent form should be complicated. There are some additional elements that can be added in the consent form based on the kind of study. And what is important is all the information, relevant information is disclosed. Then the person is competent to understand and able to comprehend, and then voluntarily give acceptance. So as you see, consent is a process. It begins before and it goes on. There's a communication channel going on between investigating team and the research and the participant, and then finally after the end of the study. Electronic consent has been suggested. You can surely use electronic tools or ask for a waiver of consent if with proper justification, but ethics committee will be reviewing that. People who are vulnerable, who are not able to protect their own interests, we have responsibility of providing protection to these people. Now, the next 6 sections, as I said, are more specific. This is clinical trials. If you're engaging in clinical trials, please note that you need to follow the Drugs and Cosmetics Act and the NDCT rules. But if the trials are being done, they are academic trials, or if they are comparator studies which are on approved or marketed products, then one needs to follow the ICMR ethical guidelines. Then public health and social behavioral research involves a number of different complex, again, gray areas. There could be demographic studies, implementation research, surveillance, screening, registries, observational studies, and therefore these 2 sections specifically deal with that. Qualitative study designs, because here the benefit may not be individual, it could be societal, and there may be need for group consenting or get stakeholders consent before we can go on. The 10th section is about genetics, and we have a number of new technologies: CRISPR, gene editing, we have prenatal diagnostics or pre-implantation genetic diagnostics and others. So there are additional concerns which are ethical, legal, and social issues. And so that section refers to that. And biobanking data set is another important section relevant to all, because we all do deal with samples or data. And this section tells that we need to categorize it into 4 categories. One is anonymous. We totally don't know whom the sample or data belongs to. The second is anonymized, which means that the data was there, but it has now been coded or delinked. Or it could be reversibly anonymized or irreversibly anonymized. If it is irreversible, means it becomes anonymous. And then there is identified. So depending on the type of data set or sample, we need to take approval from the ethics committee and also decide the informed consent. There are different types of informed consent for different types. The last section of the guideline is on emergency and disaster, which talks about how quality research can be carried out. Now, we know that there's a lot of vulnerability in India due to climate change, environment-related issues. We are witnessing, the summer this year has been something we have broken all records. So why is all this happening? There are a lot of changes that are happening in our climate or our environment, and which is impacting our health. And therefore, interventions and strategies are needed. The important thing from the ethics point of view is that the most affected ones from these challenges are those who are vulnerable. It could be people who are living in rural settings, or they could be urban settings, but they are poor, they are not able to provide for themselves. They could be women, they could be children, elderly, or indigenous communities. So it's very important that we realize that. And even the Supreme Court has this year said that there is a right to healthy environment is becoming a fundamental one. So there are a lot of things happening in this area. And some of the other activities I'll just quickly cover. The ICMR has prepared common forms for these. This is just showing you the list of all these forms. They're all one-page forms. These will help in your submission process to the ethics committee, and also help the ethics committee in quickly reviewing. The other guidelines which are important is, one is SOP for emergency review. This is a handbook. In the middle that you see is a handbook for researchers. It's just an 18-page booklet which may be easier for you to read. It's like an abstract book. Then we have the research integrity and publication ethics booklet. We also have a joint ethics review guidelines came out last year, AI guidelines, and recently we came up with the guideline on controlled human infection studies. So depending on if you're working in these areas, these may be important. These two are also important pieces of small brief addendums that were made this year. One is guideline for lab validation testing, which is now exempted from ethics review, and also is systematic review and meta-analysis, which is now exempted from ethics review. Also, we came up with this book. If you want to read more, there are 10 chapters. This may be relevant to your work. Also, we have frequently asked questions, some posters, some animated videos, and educational videos have been prepared. These are short movies, 2 to 3 minute duration each, which may be useful for conducting your own trainings and all. And I feel honored to tell you that we are a WHO collaborating center, and we are part of number of WHO and COMS publications, a lot of capacity building and brainstorming sessions. We keep organizing from time to time. Do write to us if you want areas that you would like ICMR to work upon. And this is also very important. ICMR's National Institute of Epidemiology in Chennai has started this course, the electronic course on ethics. And if you are interested in learning more about it, because I had only 50 minutes, so I'm just touching upon these things, you can join this course. This is an online course, and you can generate a certificate also. You can also visit our website, which has all the tools and documents that you need. Recently, we have also started with an outreach program for having one-to-one discussion with the ethics committee. Do write to us if you are interested. And finally, I think I'll focus a little bit on this slide before I close, and that is that, for being, for good ethics, you need a scientifically robust protocol. Science is important. The site have to be prepared, should have competence and capacity. Ethics reviews should be good. Regulatory requirements, CTRA registration, etc. must be fulfilled. No compromises in quality, informed consent process or community engagement, plan monitoring and follow-up of the participants, build collaborations, think about storing of sample or data in an ethical manner, and translate back the outcomes in form of benefit sharing or post-research benefits, and follow transparency and accountability requirements of the protocol, good publication practices. Thank you very much for your time, and I'll be happy to answer a few questions if there are any. Thank you. And I'll hand it back to you, Samriddhi.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for the thorough and informative address. Ma'am, just one question we wanted to ask. Can I?
Yes, please. Why not?
Ma'am, we wanted to know what are NEThic institutional guidelines.
Okay. NEThic is the name of a website or a portal which has been set up on DHR website. It is available at the Department of Health Research, because of India has DHR as a body or an authority to register all committees in India. So it is just a web portal, because we don't work. Otherwise, all the committee have to submit in paper. So instead of doing that, we made a portal where it is an online for the ethics committees across India to register. More than 1,200 ethics committees are registered until now.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Should we move? Moving forward, I'm pleased to introduce our next speaker, Dr. G. Narendran Sir, who will speak on regulatory issues in clinical trials from three crucial perspectives: the investigator, the institutional ethics committee, and the sponsor. Dr. Narendran is a highly respected figure in the field of respiratory diseases and clinical research. He holds an MBBS diploma in tuberculosis and respiratory diseases and a master's degree in respiratory diseases. He serves as a senior deputy director medical at the ICMR National Institute for Research in Tuberculosis based in Chetpet, Chennai. Sir has been instrumental in leading the research comparing daily versus intermittent regimens of anti-tuberculosis treatment in HIV-TB patients, which helped establish the optimal ATT schedule in India. He also served as a lead principal investigator from India for the STREAM trial stage 2, which aimed to shorten and standardize MDR-TB treatment. Additionally, he has collaborated with NIAID and NIH on immune reconstitution inflammatory syndrome. His outstanding work in medical research has earned him numerous accolades, including the Blacklock Thornton Gold Medal in Surgery during his undergraduate studies, the Nasi Scopus Award in Medical Research in 2014, and the AP Chakrapani Oration Award by the Pulmonologist Association of Andhra Pradesh in 2023. Sir is the member secretary of the Data Safety Monitoring Committee as well as the Institutional Ethics Committee of NIRT. He also serves as a chairperson of Research Committee at Chengalpattu Medical College and is a member of the research committees at Madras Medical College and Chettinad Medical College. Currently, Dr. Narendran is involved in research trials focused on shortening TB treatment in India and exploring cardiopulmonary vascular defects in post-COVID syndrome. With 58 publications to his name, Dr. Narendran's contribution to the field of medical research are both extensive and impactful. So we are delighted to have you with us, sir, and look forward to hear your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you for the kind introduction, ma'am. Can I share the slides?
Yes, sure.
Are my slides visible and am I clearly audible?
Yes, sir, you are.
So, first of all, thank you, madam, for the introduction. And the stage has been very perfectly set by Roli Mathur, ma'am. He is the doyen of ethics, currently leading the DHR ethics. So, thank you, sir, for inviting me, Dr. Tiwari, sir, and the host. So, initially, we were talking about what the ethics expects from the investigator. Now, I thought that I will take the role of what the investigator has to do, what the student has to do to clear his paper with the professor in a successful manner, more importantly, in an ethical manner, so that it is justified and then you get the approvals easily. And what happens when each committee reviews? So I have been taking the role of the investigator, but I was also a member secretary. Then I was looking at this. Every person, I would like you to be a member of the ethics committee of your institute, if it's a rotational process. The reason why I would say is then we know why these questions are asked by ethics, why it's so important to stress upon certain ethical issues and all that as we go by. So without wasting much time, I'll go to the not just the regulatory issues alone, but how do we look at it from various perspectives. The biggest problem, I'm confining myself to clinical trials because my expertise is limited to clinical trials. The biggest problem is in clinical trials, who gets to the summit first? And there are two quotations which I always say in all my lectures. Is one is science never solves a problem before it creates 10 more by Bernard Shaw. The other one is by Huxley. Medical gadgets and medicine has become so sophisticated, there's hardly any normal human being left. Now, we actually dwindle and travel between these two quotations. And these are the first things which were taken into medical, applied into medical science. So the biggest problem in clinical trials is, again, who goes to the summit first or who wants to fight? Because what happens is once there may be hundreds of people doing the same study all over the world. But once there is some result or interpretation which has occurred, then the importance of the other studies may not be fruitful. So there is a challenge. It's like a racehorse. There's a challenge on the back of the PI. He has to move fast, but in an ethical manner. That is not a very easy thing to do. So we will go through that as we go into the other slides. So as correctly said, this is one of my favorite slides, which I always show. Initially, we have a proposal, then we go for the grant, and you get the grant approved. But every place, the originality of the proposal gets changed. So one of the important aspects of the ethics is to see to that the concept doesn't get totally changed when it comes to publication. So this is one of the main activities of the ethics committee. That's why if you see the stress on the ethics committee, nobody asks you for a scientific advisory committee approval at the journal, but they always ask for ethics committee. It's one of the jobs of the PA to properly send a draft of the publication after it's published to the ethics committee, to make sure and as a verdict that yes, I have followed these rules. Doing clinical trials is not very easy. It is like acting in a drama. Observational studies are much more easy because that is digital technology. You can fight in a digital world without causing harm. The hero also is becoming all right. But this is like acting in a drama. You make one small mistake, then it's a problem. But then there's a long drawn journey which every drug makes. It's not that I always say the clinical trial is like a salmon. You have around 10,000 eggs which break down into small fishlets, but only 100 of them or a few of them reach the ocean. In the same way, there's so most of them give way. You hardly have, let's say, around 4,000 drugs. You have one or two which see the light of the day at the end of the trial results. So why are clinical trials important? Because they provide the perfect evidence base to inform treatment guidelines and improve patient care. As initially told, I would not go into the details because it will be a repetition. The most important, as initially told, was establishing priorities for research. You don't do research for the sake of doing it. How frequent is the condition relative to other conditions? How much is the disability or dysfunction that is caused equally, or disability or dysfunction which can be prevented? And then now there is more emphasis on cost-effective means to do this. You can't spend 1 lakh rupees for doing a small blood test and then say that is fantastic. So that is also coming into ethics in a big way. Now, features of a good randomized trial, there's a randomization which is taking place. You have a good control group to look into, and there's a blinding, and there should be sufficient sample size. I'll come to each of them. But then what is the importance of ethics? At each point, whatever we do, there should be a phenomenon of equipoise. The study should be well designed and as safe as possible. It's not just a question of the scientific concept being very strong. It should all be very safe. And there should be a clear process of recruitment, that is the informed consent process and the informed consent And the process are all, whatever we do should be documented. That is important because the monitors will be asking you for each one of this. Most of the times when we are given the PI ship, we feel very happy. There are two things which should be dreaded to take. One is the member secretary of the ethics, other is the PI, because at every place your responsibility is extremely high. And it is not just boasting at the top of the summit that you are the boss, but you have to help your subordinates climb the cliff. That is why I put this, because very important, each PI should understand whatever nook and corner of the study, anything happens or trial, anything happens, he is the primary person responsible for this. So for this, you need to know, the entire team has to know what's the difference between clinical trial and what is the difference between clinical management. Even though it's not something which is, let's say, hard or very difficult English terms, the value of documentation and monitoring is very, very important. The most important, how to differentiate between the two and when to switch gears. If there is an imminent danger, you follow the process of asking the PA or the sponsor what needs to be done. You are failing in your duty as an ethical person. So it all depends on where you need to cross the boundary and where you need to not to cross the boundary. So this has to be strategically planned even before. That is why you have to have talks with the sponsor and say, this is what I'm going to do. Documentation is important. The other thing is you would have been extremely, that is what we commonly see when we have collaborations with leading medical colleges. They are excellent in treating the cases, but you do not find the sufficient documentation, especially when a life-threatening problem occurs in the form of SC. They have done all their work. They have done everything in a proper way, but then that needs to be documented methodically and meticulously for us to gain to understand that this has been done, because the ethics will demand this kind of a document, because what is not documented is not done. It's often a common layman perspective. He thinks that whenever we do trials, this is helpful. Whatever experimental drug you have is always going to be beneficial, and then you have greater privilege in acquiring investigations, trying to shortcut the line and then go into for medical attention in a very fast way. This is not what is actually the trial is meant for. So that has to be explained to the patient in order to avoid complications at a later date. So the most important point for a principal investigator is to look at the site evaluation. What is before any trial is done, the usual SWOT analysis, strength, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats have to be evaluated. I'll come to the Lesagna's law. Never have any false statements about a topic sample. You say that, yes, I have fantastic drug which can be used. Nothing of that. So no adjective to be placed when you are contemplating on a trial. Try to find out the advantages and disadvantages and whether it serves the purpose in your country. Most of the time, multi-centric trials are done because it's easy for people have been thinking that it's easy for them to do trials in India. It's no more. After the regulations have become very strict, there is more emphasis on safety of our Indian population. So there should be a definite purpose behind which you are doing. Let's say a disease which is more frequent like tuberculosis in India, where you need to do interventions. The other important thing is find out or try to evaluate from the collaborator whether he is adherent to regulatory procedures. You should not tell tomorrow that I will not be submitting the SAEs, I will not be doing this to my regulatory authority, I'll be doing to my country. All those things should not be there. It's always good to speak out deficiencies, because once you do that and then have a compromise, let's say, okay, this is what I do, then the bonding will be better. If you already have a collaborator who you think the attributes are good enough for you to take him on board for the trial, you can do that. And then the cost of doing the project in each site varies. So these are the things you have to keep it in mind before you start writing a protocol. Now, this is what is Lesagna's law. Often when we go to medical colleges or medical hospitals, leading hospitals, they say, we have plenty of cases. Don't worry at all. How many days do you want to finish off your trial? But what is important is every time you have one inclusion criteria or one exclusion criteria, the sample size gets divided by that. It's not just the sample size. I will say the sample whom you try to get into the trial, it gets reduced. Let us take you have 5 inclusion criteria and 5 exclusion criteria, and the person says, now we have 2,000 cases. Then you have only 200 cases. This is what is the Lesagna's law. And the most important thing is after you filter out using the Lesagna's laws and say that, yes, I have 200 cases which are ready, all those patients may not be willing to enter the study. That is the next point. You may have the patient with the target disease, but the patients who are eligible to enter are different from the patients who are willing to enter. So that is what you need to be careful about. So the biggest problem with any trial comes only with recruitment. The enrollment has been always under the scanner. If you draw a line, enrollment will always be lesser than like you have seen in cricket, the run rates and the person chasing the run rate. It's always less than what we anticipate. But most important is initially honesty is the best policy. You say, this is all I have. If you are in a site, I'm talking about, let's say you are in a site, you don't say that, yes, I have 200 cases, 300 cases. Optimistically think and give a very practical anticipation, some kind of a probable sample size. You can say, this is what I can give you every day or every month. The second thing is, this is very, very important because it saves time at a later date. The biggest problem is, don't think when they give you the answer that, yes, we have thousands of cases with us to be given. You put this Lesagna's law and see how many cases are actually there. But the most important thing is a patient who enters after a consent form where he is called a participant. The participant's data starts from the day he enters the trial with a consent to the day he gets out as a closeout. Most of the patients or participants we have seen, they're very enthusiastic during initial treatment period. But this enthusiasm keeps weaning away as am I audible, ma'am?
Yes, sir, you are. Hmm.
So I'm not going to. Are my slides visible?
Not yet, sir.
I think there was a break in the net connectivity. Sorry.
Now it is, sir. Now it is.
Okay. Okay. So I don't want to go into this, but what is important when you are talking about recruitment is when you have a sample size assumption, you should also think of rising inflation. When you're not able to get to the sample size, need for additional collaboration, your selection of sites, training of staff is very, very important. From the zenith where the PI or the nodal PI starts up to the last person the trial should give the same answer to the monitor, and that should be ethical. So these are the things. I'll come to adaptive sample sizes. The net connectivity is unfortunately unstable now, ma'am. Have I rejoined?
Yes, sir, you
Okay.
have.
So the other important point is allowable exceptions. You say that the patient should come on Monday at 7 o'clock. If you write it that way in all your procedures, what happens if the patient comes at 7:50? I'm just giving you an example. So you always have a range, like what we give it for a normal laboratory value. You say that patient will be attending the center between 3 and the 6th day or the first week of. So have your protocol in such a way that you yourself do not try to overshoot the regulations which are already put by the protocol. And the important thing is, before convincing others, this is what I learned from my first ethics chairman, Dr. Jacob Abraham, when I presented my first trial. What he said was, I was just shivering because there were around 15 or 16 of them inside the hall, including a lot of experts from various fields. The simple thing what he said was, my dear, if you can put your friend on this trial and you can confidently save him from the difficulty, you come in and present. Otherwise, I think you are wasting your time. You can go. Very simple explanation. Put yourself in the boots of the patient and see what is happening. And this is what you need to convince a sponsor before taking up a protocol or a trial. So the ideas and hints for better recruitment is keep broad inclusion-exclusion criteria. That's what I would say. But justify what is the need for it. That is what is important. You can't have two generic terms saying that I need males for this study or I need females for this study. That is not the way. All that we say is don't be too specific, but at the same time, don't be too generic. You have to strike a balance. And then counseling on benefits and purpose of the trial. What is the need of the trial? Made the patient realize that, as I told initially, that complete data set comes from the day of enrollment to the day the patient completes treatment, and then the follow-up and the closeout is done. This is important. And then the ethical moral support to the kith and kin, explaining the details to the relatives as well, and make procedures simple for the patient, reduce his time of stay. These are ways in which you try to help the participant and also see to that the participant's adherence to the trial procedures are maintained. And then that is why we give a travel cost and nutrition report. Of course, the work job of the IEC to see that it's not too much or not too less. And you should not give any guarantee regarding the outcome. That is sometimes which always occurs. You don't worry, once you join the trial, you'll be always, because what is the use of a trial to be done when you are not, when you're absolutely sure that this is what is going to happen? So that is why now the role of pragmatic trials have come in a huge way. They have their own advantages and disadvantages. I will not touch upon that as of now. Now, international protocols, we really get excited if you get a call from one of the international, the big shots saying that we have a trial and we want you to be the collaborators. The biggest problem we face is when we face the advisory committees, any one of them, either the SAC, the ethics or the DSMC. Most of them, they are very poetic. There are lots of times in which our ethics committee used to point out mistakes saying that this is not the title because what you want to have put inside the protocol is something different. So I'm actually grateful to the headquarters because now ICMR insists that before you collaborate with somebody, be convinced and you get for yourself convinced and you should have a say in the protocol rather than blindly following what is happening. The second thing is it's always good to have just one primary objective, and that is the, let's say, the preamble for you to start the sample size calculation. But most of the times you have multiple objectives. The reason is minimum investment and maximum gains, as simple as that. But you try to balance this because most of the times you get a protocol, they say that this is a global protocol, you cannot make changes and all such stuff. But before the protocol is made, you can always write to them saying that this is your opinion, this is the way our ethnic people behave. And that is where the role of the community advisory board also comes. Important for a PE to understand is the way each ethics committee looks is totally different. I just summoned, but what is important for you is just one thing. Are you convinced that it is going to do some help to your? If you can convince yourself, you can always convince others. Simple. So coming to the sample size is an assumption. It's a mathematical assumption. Most of the times, these assumptions actually do not stand the rule because the important assumption in a clinical trial that all patients are recruited at the same rate, which is, I don't think any study has ever done that. That is the reason why people go for multicentric trials and collaborating sites, because if one person is not able to give it from one part of the world, the other person will be able to contribute. That's like a division of labor. The other important thing is a lot of design changes have gone into this sample size. Very difficult for old people to understand this. There's always a generation gap, which we say. See, I am very happy looking at the dictionary, but whereas the younger generation just looks at the Google and says, this is how I use it. I say, go to your thesaurus and find out what is happening. He will go to the review panel and then put the thesaurus. And so things keep changing. We need to know how these concepts are developing. So I'm coming to a simple parallel RCT. So all that is important first is to find out the crux of the problem. How much of difficulties are there in trying to find out what is exactly the burden of the disease, or how much exactly is the success rates with these regimens, and then follow it up with a consent form. And then if eligible, you randomize them and give the intervention and then outcome by categories. But then there are two things when we do in clinical trials. One is randomization, other is stratification, something which every medical person or person working in trials need to know. It's not something which is which you may not know. I want to update your knowledge on this. Randomization takes care of unknown factors. Stratification takes care of known factors. And it is not compulsory. Most of the times we ask for stratification. Stratification is not compulsory at the beginning, but at least during analysis, if you have a known factor, you use stratification. For example, let's say how much I can cross the time for crossing the road, let us say. It all depends on age. So you make an age stratification. Either you can do it upfront or you can do it. What is not known will be adjusted by the randomization. That's why you do a randomization. So the designs, I am not going to all the designs. I will just stick on to the three designs. Initially, when we are doing trials in NART, we follow the superiority design. Superiority means A is, let's say experimental arm is there. Let's say A is better than B. But then slowly it changed to equivalence. Now equivalence is gone. Nobody is using the equivalence design because of its own problems. It still has some role in bioequivalence studies, but not in clinical studies anymore. Now we have gone to what is called non-inferiority. Simple example. Let's say the director of the institute is not available. He's attending a meeting. The next person in that cadre will go and invite the guest and then start explaining about the institute. We know pretty well that director of an institute will have the best knowledge on how to express or how to represent his institute. But for the time being, he provides the crisis management, a stopgap management. That became the basis of what is called non-inferiority, where we know that the test regimen is worse than the control regimen. But there are some advantages. Let's say feasibility of administration, like instead of injection, you have a oral tablet to give, or drug toxicity, or the duration is less. Some kind of an advantage which you perceive will come to the patient. Use a non-inferiority design. It's a one-sided design. So these are the other designs which are available. Just a glimpse about pragmatic trials. Pragmatic trials are those which are done in the program, where you don't.
Sir, you're hello, sir. Am I audible to you? Network issue. Okay.
I'm sorry for the interruption. Am I slide visible, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Please hold on for a second. I think there is some network issue.
Are my slides visible?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay. The other thing is an adaptive sample design, where you go in for a continuous alpha function. The main reason for adaptive sample design is for an outcome which occurs very rapidly. Now, these designs have been applied in a topsy-turvy way to other, like chronic diseases. It's not a good thing to use the adaptive sample design, where you take multiple arms, just like the MAMS design, and keep on adding participants to the best arm. That is more of an ethical, it's in tune with the ethical guidelines and ethical ways of trying to maximize recovery and reducing failures. So again, a well-designed RCT is an evidence-based for the best efficacy or effectiveness and safety. The most important aspect of this is sometimes you may have to blind it, sometimes you may not, depending on the disease. And there are various ways in which you can measure disease incidence and multiple outcomes. Now, the biggest problem with RCTs comes because of the responsibility it takes. So it literally drains your energy because you have to be on the participant for 24/7 into 365. You cannot say that today is a holiday, I'm not able to take. So all these things come into action. The second thing is the cost associated with doing RCTs. And often there are limited follow-ups, which is a drawback. Inefficient for rare diseases or diseases with very, very delayed outcomes. You can't look at a chronic demyelinating disease and using trials and then say that within 2 months I have done drastic things. So that is not possible. There's always the question of an ethical constraint. It's not always possible to manipulate an exposure at random and requires complex designs, as I told you. Sometimes generalizability may be questioned or ridiculed. You do such a good ideal experiment and finally they will say, no, this may not be applicable to this because you have this experiment done under ideal conditions, which may not translate to what is actually happening in the field. But I would always suggest going in for an RCT before you go for a pragmatic trial, because unless you know what is happening, we don't know whether the execution was wrong or the product itself was defective. So the major drawbacks, some of them I always say, as I already told you, as of now I'm looking at the point of an ethics member. Most of the times it's a disbelief or a misconception that ethics members or member secretary or chairman or person should not be contacted before the start of the study. It's not so. You can always discuss with them. That is very, very important. And then you reduce the number of objectives accordingly. Always reduce the forms. The best thing for you to do, having done an FDA trial, this is my experience, I will say, is there should not be any duplication. People start writing the name in the top of that is the name, which is wrong. You have to de-identify them. Then even if it is going to be code numbers, you can't keep on writing in each of the pages above saying that this is the code, this is the code. Of course, there are some advantages, but that is the reason if you go for an electronic data capture, at one place you put this is the code of the participant, then it gets captured so that mistakes do not happen. You should not keep on. Most important is do not accept funding. This is one of the tricks I will always say before you get an IEC clearance. Because what happens, it put both the PA as well as the IEC members in a very, very difficult situation because the PA will say, I've already received the funds, so I cannot give it back. So please give me a positive reply, which cannot be done by the ethics unless they adjudicate it as a safe study. The ICF is site specific. These are the problems we always face with investigators. They say we got a global protocol, we cannot change it. We have done that in a FDA study, the study of stream stage 2, where we have changed our ICF. Our ethics committee stood by its ground and said that these are the changes we require because these are the things which are very specific to your site. And this we had done. And always the problem arises with the informed consent form compatibility with local language. The vernacular consent will speak something else. The English, that's why you do what is called a back translation, and there should be a back translation certificate for the ICFs. So I'll not go much into this. There's some of the aspects which you have to budget it. I'll for the want of time. Most importantly, please see to that you take legal things away from clinical trials at the start itself. So the other problem which comes to us, the PI, is when we ask for monitoring. All our subordinate staff are like pets. At the time when the monitor comes, we say they may be very hardworking, but out of fright or out of sheer breakdown, they may sometimes behave in this way. So it is very, very important for you to instruct your subordinates what exactly you expect of them. Sometimes your honesty is most important in these kind of things. But the trick is never have an audit or a monitoring on Monday, because you require time to prepare yourself for the audit and also to inform and teach your subordinates how it has to be done. So the practical tips in following protocol procedure is, before the execution of the trial itself, you define and delineate study procedures. Delegation is the most important point in clinical trials. Find out the innovative steps, how good you can improvise on such. One of the best things which I have seen in NIRT, working for the last 24 years in clinical trials, is what we call it as a Y form. It's a communication procedure, just a single paper where you can communicate with any of your staff, not only in your own clinic, but also the staffs, the social workers, or whoever you want to do is. That's a very comprehensive form. In the same way, this was appreciated by the international communities. Like what I meant to say is, have your own innovations in order to improvise on your trial procedures. The other important is, are all our staff equipped to cover for those risks? That is very, very important. Adequate training from ground zero. An attender or peon should be able to know what is to be done and what is not to be done. Always have salvage measures. It's not that all the patients who are treated by you are going to always get to success. Some people may die, some people may not respond to your therapy. So there should be salvage measure at each point. I already told about allowable exception. Contact details should be very important. Some people give a common number, which if you call, the patient's call, nobody will even take those numbers. So you have to be specific with the numbers whom you have to give. But at the same time, see to that the privacy is also maintained. So there are certain agencies and approvals. The most important now is it's mandatory for you to register all trials in CTRA. And now even the, like the previous speaker said, even non-interventional trials also required to be in CTRA. HMSC approval, we get it if there is any point of foreign funding. It need not be sample transfer. But if you are going to go for a sample transfer, even data transfer, you have to have what is called a material transfer agreement. Even data is considered as a material in research. There is one more body which is called National Biodiversity Authority, which also looks into the integrity and patency issues. So the previous DCGI regulations on new drugs were a lot of things for which you had to apply to the CDSCO. But now it has been confined to either a new drug, which is not yet marketed in India, global drug trials. It will come in the GCT, global clinical trials, all a vulnerable population. Apart from that, you don't have to go for DCGA. So that actually comes to you where you have two types of trials. One is a regulatory trial, other is an academic trial. For an academic trial, the PA has to apply to the IEC through the IEC and say that this is only academic trial, so please allow me to do the trial. So it's best on the part of the IEC to send it to CDSCO and you wait for 30 days. If by 30 days you don't receive a reply, most of the times you receive it. If you don't receive a reply, you can say it's an academic trial. But the IEC should be convinced. It's not that if you are doing an academic trial, you are safe from all litigations or all the procedures which has to be, which you have to undergo in the ethical means. All that it means is the exact duty of the CDSCO is taken up by the IEC of that site. As simple as that. Licensing a new drug, I have already told you. And these are the things. But anything you want to change with a drug which has already received approval, they are exempt now if it is academic. That is, it is not for commercial purposes. So coming to the SAEs, these things you know already. What is important is that SAEs need not be necessarily related to study medication. Study medication doesn't mean all these drugs. It means the drugs which you are trying to experiment with, including the control arm. And then you have to spell out the attributable causality. SAS, probably it is related. Definitely is related. There is a grading in which you give the attributable causality. I will not go into 122 because this is the way people give the compensation. There is a simply, I want to simplify the task of SAEs. Now, their SAE means serious adverse event, which you have to report to the regulatory body or to the IEC. By the time you are aware of it, within 24 hours, you send it to IEC as well as CDSCO and to the sponsor. So the PA sends to 3 persons, the sponsor, the CDSCO, and the IEC. The IEC gives its causality and the sponsor gives its causality to the DCGA. The sponsor has to give it immediately. And the CDSCO also, the IEC also had to respond within 30 days. By 90 days, whether the causality is drug-induced or study medication-induced, they should revert back to the sponsor who should pay the compensation within 30 days. So these are some of the reasons for which compensation is paid. But what we have to be careful is protocol violation and scientific misconduct and negligence. These are things in which your own institution may betray you saying that we are not part of it. Especially international trials, you have to be very careful with this because if this is proved, then the person is directly responsible for the paying the compensation, not your institute. The failure to give the inter-investigational product, I was very happy that we were one of the institutions which sent our feedback to CDSCO saying that if it is research, how do you know for sure that this is going to create the effect which have been anticipated? So what they have said now is it is going to be those where you prevent the patient from taking the control. Like you can't give, if there is a medication already available, it can be like, for example, we do MDR-TB trials. We have the new drug, we have the placebo along with the background regimen. If you fail to give the background regimen, then this clause comes into effect. So this is the compensatory formula for this thing, which I will not go into in. Am I reconnected, ma'am?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So what is the important of the consent form is there should not be a hurry. Most of the times we hurriedly ask the patients because usually the PAs or the study staff are under the impression that the participant may say that they will refuse to join the study. So don't go for a hurry. The other important is don't worry. Don't say that you don't talk about the side effects, you don't talk about the problems, nothing like that. No fury. You don't say that you will not get treatment here unless you join the study. No fairy. You don't think that the study is going to get into, definitely this guy by joining the trial is going to have success. So these are some of the points which you learn over the years, that these are the points where you should not touch and you should not adjudicate on the part of the patient. You say, if you are okay with it, you can join the study. That's why we have what is called, sometimes called an ICF narrative. This ICF narrative is like very nicely put by Roli ma'am. ICF narrative is you write down in the case sheet who were all present, what are all the questions asked, because the consent form doesn't give you that information. This is important for monitoring. Any international FDA monitoring will ask for this, and also we look into this in case of litigations. Very useful to you when a litigation arises. They will say that you are not told anything about this, but then you write all these things. The ICF narrative need not be signed by the patient. That is another important. That doesn't mean you can go back and manipulate it out of research integrity and ethics. We don't do anything about, but this will be, it will come in very useful situations where you are threatened by legalities. So budgeting and financing, you have to be very careful. Budgeting and financing. Line listing is important. When we have funding agency, they are very strict. They do not accept any modification. So always have broad categories. You don't say this computer, this thing which you require, but then you go for a different computer or go for instead of a desktop or a laptop. So generalize it as computer and accessories, stationery, like that. Allowable exceptions, you put it in the protocol. Also have provisions for allowable exceptions in your budget. Always use the keep it simple and straightforward principle. Allowance for ethical obligation. These may not be impressive to the sponsor. He may or may not agree to it, but you have to do it. That is, what is the salvage regimen in case a patient fails a clinical trial? The contact screening in case of communicable diseases. Complications that may arise anticipated out of doing the trial, and then what happens when you do amendments, publication fees, and translation fees. These are certain fees which not concentrated by most of the investigators. This you have to keep a close eye and watch, because otherwise you will have lesser budget. The biggest problem is having a good chat with the good chat with the sponsor. Otherwise you are trapped. So the other important thing before you want to start a trial is the clinical trial agreement. So the PA reviews it, and usually the head of the institution again reviews it and look at the facilities for procedures which are available in the institute and not available in the institute. See to that the clinical trial agreement obeys the law of the land in the country in which the study is being done and the country in which is asking you to do the study. And then ethics of all parties are obeyed strictly. If these are not available in your clinical trial agreement, then you run into problem. Compensation and insurance, you should always go for 3 types of insurances. And they have different roles to protect the PA as well as the collaborators. One is the compensation for trial-related injury, where if it is proved, then you compensate. Second is medical negligence. Somebody may say, you have been speaking in this workshop, but you have not seen the patient. If you had gone and seen the patient at that time, you should have succeeded. Third is unanticipated medical complications in which you have to, where the patient himself raises the issue of medical negligence or trial-related injury. So for all these things, it doesn't mean that you should have 3 insurances separately. The insurance agreement, which is given by your insurance agency, should be able to cover up for all these things. And this is how it has to be documented. Most importantly, what is important is you have lots of ethics committee, and by the time you get the approval, the clock starts ticking once the sponsor hands over the protocol to you with the first ethics committee approval. So initiation should be quick. So you should have some kind of a pre-work being done before you get the budget. Talk to your colleagues how you would go about. This is basically a problem with multicentric studies. The other important thing is their annual reports and other things are actually tied or tagged to their computer systems. So by 1 year, if you want an annual report, it has to be given. You may not even know that you would have just received the budget just 1 day before the entire year gets over. So that you have to be careful. And especially in governmental institutions where a hierarchy needs to be followed and you need to have all sorts of signatures and other things, it's always good to explain this to the sponsor. So how to overcome is a good discussion with the sponsor, proper meetings with your teammates, what you expect out of them. The biggest thing which you require to do as an administrator, because every PA is an administrator, is job description and delegation. This is very, very important. This is what I want you to do. This is how I want you to do. This is how soon I want you to do. So this is very, very important. And then the plus and minus of sharing between centers, that should be taken care of, and always have a mock drill. Mock drill is extremely important in confirming and then putting in place the consent form and the consent process. So with this, I end my this thing. It's a very vast topic, so it's not easy for me to cover up. I'm always happy to share whatever queries you have. So I started with my mentor, Dr. Soumya Swaminathan, and I end with my mentor in ethics committee, late Dr. Vasanta Mutswamy, who has been inspirational in making all of us learn the art of ethics and ethics committees. Thank you very much. I'm really sorry for the unstable connectivity. If it had been given, I regret for the inconvenience caused to audience. Kind of.
Thank you so much, sir, for your detailed and insightful presentation. So our participants have some questions for you. So if you allow, I may ask you.
Definitely, ma'am.
So first question is, in order to conduct randomized controlled trials across ICMR institutions, what specific aspects of the approval should we expect from the ICMR headquarters?
I think the best person to answer this will be Dr. Roli Mathur, ma'am, because they have already started the Central Ethics Committee. The reason is that if you have a very burning issue and you do not have time to go to all the ethics committees, you can have a joint ethics committee, but I don't know whether the SOPs are already finalized, because it's a new experiment which we are going to do. It's not just for, I would say, not just for this trial. Anything with multicentric trials, it's always good to do it. But usually what I would suggest is you have a meeting at the headquarters and then try to find out what are your sites, and then go down and then have the ethics approvals, because this will be easy, because there are lots of advantages in doing a central ethics committee, but there are lots of disadvantages also, in the sense that the initial and the site-specific issues can be looked into greater detail. It's not easy for the CEC to accumulate all the members, because the ethics committee has got a fine composition of various people, and they are all tuned to the local issues. So how are you going to face these local issues if you're not going to have a good representation? So it's not very easy to do that, but I think Roli ma'am can add on this.
Yeah, thank you, Dr. Narendran. You are absolutely right. There are both sides of the thing. And so I'll say a few more things also. One is that we must know that for clinical trials, we follow the NDCT rules. And so as a requirement, the ethics committee has to have a hospital, and it has to be registered. So trials, in our current regulatory framework, it is not possible for another ethics committee or a central ethics committee to give, or a common ethics committee to give a clearance for a site, because the ethics committee at the site has to review and give approval. That is a regulatory requirement. Correct? However, the ICMR guidelines of 2017, which is mostly to do with biomedical health research, which is slightly less risky research, which could be observational studies, surveys, epidemiological, and other types of studies, non-clinical trial, basically, which are non-regulatory clinical trials. So for them, the ICMR guidelines have suggested one mechanism. It is not also correct that everything has to be done by Central Ethics Committee, because Central Ethics Committee's mandate is not primarily to do research reviews. That's not the primary mandate. It's a National Ethics Committee. It is to deal with national issues of concern in ethics, to build guidance and policy. And if there are complex issues, ethics committees from ICMR network or Ministry of Health, they refer the matter to ICMR Central Ethics Committee for opinion. So it is not a standard ethics committee like an institutional ethics committee. What is there in the guidelines of ICMR is that out of all the sites, let's say there are 20 sites for a given study. Out of those sites, one ethics committee, which could be the coordinating site, takes up the leadership role and becomes the designated ethics committee. I am refraining from the word using central because we can get confused. We are also talking about non-ICMR institutions. Why are we only thinking of ICMR? There are non-ICMR institutions also who are involved. And ICMR's committee don't have any standhold on that. So among those sites, it could be AIMS or it could be any other medical colleges or so their ethics committees, they have to decide that one of the ethics committee becomes designated ethics committee. Now, this designated ethics committee does a complete review, a thorough review of all ethical aspects. and it shares its recommendations with the sites. Now, at the site, they can do an expedited review because they have agreed that the main review has been completed, the full review in a meeting. But now there is no need for a full meeting and to delay it for 3 months. They can very quickly do an expedited review involving chairperson and 1 or 2 members and look at only local site related issues and the informed consent translations and agree to the decision of the main committee, the designated ethics committee. So this is what has been proposed by ICMR Ethical Guidelines 2017. However, the implementation remains a little challenging because of different ways of people are interpreting it. So in fact, we are right now in the process of building a more detailed guideline document on this, a specific separate document on common review for multi-center research. It is not central review. It is common review for multi-center research because we understand that sometimes we have to avoid duplication. Also, there's a global discussion going on. In fact, I'm going day after tomorrow to Geneva. There's a meeting going on in next week in Geneva, and that is on building an ecosystem for clinical trials. When during pandemic or other situations, we have to quickly review research. And now every ethics committee is taking 6 months to review. It delays it. And poor quality of research is coming because of lack of cohesion or, lack of coordination between the sites. So we have to act very quickly. For best science, robust reviews, there should be good communication. Why a particular ethics committee is taking a particular decision, the other ethics committee doesn't have any idea. They start from scratch. So how can we use this as a process to strengthen our clinical trials? Strengthen our clinical trials. This is the discussion we must have. And for that, good communication between the sites and coordination is needed. I think communication can solve a lot of problems because we all work in our cocoons. We don't know other side ne kya kiya, how they have taken decision. What is the decision? It is not shared with the other sides. If we know that how it has to be done, we don't need to duplicate everything. I hope I have been able to answer.
Ma'am, the second thing I just want to add is what she said is the capacity. See, we cannot generalize on the capacity of each of the institute with respect to because certain expertise are unique to certain institutes. The other important problem as far as clinical trials are concerned is how we are going to manage a complication. So those things are there. Some of them will have hospitals, some of them, we were happy that from this time we started our first study, we are now going into nearly the 30th or 31st study of TB RCTs. We have been going along with the TB sanatorium. So we have full access to treatment and we do the treatment there. In the same way, that is the thing. How much is your capacity to cope up with other aspects? That cannot be generalized. So that is the problem which every ethics committee, that is why they put the onus on the institutional ethics committee.
Very true.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, ma'am. So now moving forward.
Thank you.
It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Dr. V.V. Banurekha, a prominent figure in the field of clinical research and tuberculosis. Dr. Banurekha is currently working as Scientist E in the Department of Clinical Research at the National Institute for Research in Tuberculosis, Chennai. Dr. Banurekha completed her MBBS at the Madras Medical College and went on to earn a Masters of Public Health from the National Institute of Epidemiology, ICMR School of Public Health in Chennai. Further demonstrating her commitment to medical ethics, she also holds a postgraduate diploma in bioethics. At ICMR NIRT, Dr. Banurekha plays a crucial role in clinical trials and operational research studies focused on the diagnosis, treatment, and prevention of tuberculosis. Dr. Banurekha is also a prolific author with over 100 scientific publications in both national and international journals. Please join me in welcoming Dr. Banurekha, who will be addressing us on ethical consideration in clinical trials. Ma'am, we are eager to hear your valuable insights.
So thank you very much. At the outset, I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to deliver this talk. Is my screen visible and I'm audible?
Yes, ma'am, you are.
Yeah, okay. So my talk will focus on ethical considerations in clinical trials. And just to brush up with the basics, Dr. Roli had done a very detailed presentation about the ethical principles and everything. So, but it's always good to refresh our basics. So ethics came into picture because of unethical human experiments that were done, especially during the World War. Were subjected to various uh, threatening experiments like exposure to high altitude and chemical sterilization, introducing microorganisms into the body to study the effects, and the world famous Tuskegee syphilis trial, which all refer to unethical human experiments. So, in terms of all that, the basic ethical principles in research that we need to have in mind, be it any research, whether it is observational or clinical, once it comes to research, the basic ethical principles from the Belmont report, which is beneficence and non-maleficence, which is good and do no harm, autonomy, which is respect for persons, and justice, which is fairness. So it's very important that though at the time of developing the protocol as well as reviewing the protocol in committees, those kind of ethical principles are followed. And in general, the researcher must protect the rights, safety, and dignity and well-being of the research participants, ensure that basic ethical principles are followed. It's also important to have appropriate qualifications and competence in research methodology, and they should be compliant towards scientific, medical, ethical, legal, and social requirements of research. So, as a researcher, one should make sure that all these aspects are followed while planning the research as well as conducting the research. And the ethics committee is responsible to ensure that the research is conducted according to ethical principles. So how do we ensure that the principle of beneficence and non-maleficence is, followed in our research is to have a very favorable risk and benefit ratio and the anticipated benefits to justify the risk. So this risk should not be really very high with a very low benefit. So that type of research is very, very not acceptable. And in terms of autonomy or respect for persons, how do we ensure that in research is getting an informed consent, offering additional protection of vulnerable study participants, ensuring privacy and confidentiality? In terms of justice and fairness, equal distribution of burden and benefits, we have to have a fair inclusion and exclusion criteria, not include vulnerable populations unnecessarily to benefit others, and in terms of also post-trial benefits, wherein the participants of research are benefited from the positive study results. And when we come to clinical trials, if you see the hierarchy of quality of evidence, it's one of the highest in the pyramid, where the quality of evidence is very higher because the risk of bias is very low as far as randomized controlled trials is concerned. So, what are clinical trials? So, clinical trial is any research or study that prospectively assigns human participants or groups of humans into one or more of health-related interventions to evaluate the effects on health outcomes. So, the intervention could be drugs, vaccines, biosimilars, phytopharmaceuticals. It can be a public health intervention, a socio-behavioral intervention, technology, device, and interventions involving traditional systems of medicine. So we were talking about regulatory clinical trial and academic clinical trial. So when we plan a study with a drug for a clinical trial, you need to understand whether it is falling the under the ambit of regulatory or under academic, because the regulations are different for both of them. So a regulatory clinical trial implies a clinical trial with new drugs, which is a drug has not been used in the country and has not been approved as safe and efficacious by the Central Licensing Authority. And the drug approved by the Central Licensing Authority for certain claims, and you're going to market it with modified or new claims. So that also is considered as a new drug when it goes in for a label change. fixed dose combination of 2 or more drugs which are be combined for the first time, that also qualifies for a new drug. And modified or sustained release form of a drug or novel delivery system of any drug approved by the Central Licensing Authority. Vaccines are rDNA derived products, monoclonal antibodies. So all this. So whether the drug falls under the criteria of a regulatory clinical trial, these are the criteria that is outlined in the new drug rules. And approval from Central Licensing Authority or the DCGI is required in addition to ethics committee approvals if your study is going to look at a new drug. So, I mean, most of you would be knowing about the different phases in clinical trial. There is phase 1, phase 2, phase 3, phase 4. So phase 1 is the initial administration of the new drug or vaccine into humans. So that is for initial safety and tolerability, pharmacokinetics, pharmacodynamics. In case of vaccines, immunogenicity or drug or safety would be tested in phase 1. In phase 2, it's therapeutic efficacy for drugs and immunogenicity for vaccine in a limited number of patients or participants. And phase 3 is to demonstrate or confirm the therapeutic benefit or protection in case of vaccines. So after phase 3, the drug will go for marketing approval, and phase 4 are the post-marketing surveillance and phase 4 clinical trial studies. So what is we saw the regulatory clinical trial and the different phases that the new drug would go as far as trial is concerned. Now, what is an academic clinical trial? A trial of a drug that is already approved for a claim, and you're going to do it for a new indication or a new route of administration, new dose or new dosage. For example, we are looking at drugs like metformin and statin for other indications, whether they be used as a adjunct host modulator therapy in forms of tuberculosis. So if it is not going to be a label change for the drug, and we are going to do it for a research purpose, then that will academic clinical trial. So approval is required from the ethics committee. Ethics committee can write to DCGI and say that we have approved such a trial, and if they don't hear from them for a period of 1 month, then it's deemed to be approved, and your further correspondence will be to the ethics committee, where DCGI will not be involved in such academic clinical trials. So in clinical trials, you need to conduct the trial within the you have to follow CDSCO rules, which is the New Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules 2019, and they should be prospectively registered with the CTRI. The trial should be scientifically and ethically sound, and preclinical studies should precede the trials on humans. And as mentioned earlier, the ethics committee should be registered with the DCGI for reviewing new trials with new drugs, and they should also follow the quorum requirements. So this is the Clinical Trial Registry of India, where not only clinical trial, most of the research studies are encouraged to be registered after the start of the study, not after starting, prior to enrollment of the first participant. And the ethics committee reviewing the clinical trial has to be registered with the CDSCO or DHR. Important for new drug, they should be registered with the CDSCO. And in terms of geographic jurisdiction, so the ethics committee should be within a 50-kilometer radius of the trial site. So only that ethics committee can oversee or be responsible as far as CDSCO guidelines goes. And the ethics committee has to review the protocol prior to initiation of the study. And there is a quorum for drug trials that has been met and review, which has a medical scientist, a clinician, a legal expert, a social scientist or representative of NGO, ethicist or theologian, a layperson. So these 5 people should be there when a clinical trial is discussed for approval in an ethics committee meeting. And not only the initial approval, the ethics committee has got the responsibility of ongoing review of the trial. they should review the adverse events, the main outcomes, etc. And the most important thing is for any trial-related injury, it is ethics committee who decide the first quantum of compensation. And for regulatory trial, then the TCGI has to look into that compensation and then approve it. And the ethics committee has a responsibility to maintain the records for clinical trial for a period of 5 years after completion of the trial. So this is a CDSCO website for registration of ethics committee, which is valid for a period of 5 years. And Dr. Rowley had mentioned about the NITIC website where the DHR is responsible for it, registering all the other ethics committee which oversee research. So in terms of review of protocols, so an investigator should also be very proactive in looking at the protocol that he developed and the ethics committee during review in terms of aspects of the qualification. So if it's not that if I'm doing a study on children, I need to be a pediatrician, but a pediatrician you need to be board on the team. So a good team with reference to the research that is being planned is required. The adequacy of study sites. So whether for my sample size, whether this many study sites are okay with to finish the recruitment during the particular time period, the scientific design and the way the study needs to be conducted, whether there is any ethical issues in selection and recruitment of participants, is the informed consent process going to be robust, whether there is a detailed benefit risk assessment, and how the privacy and confidentiality of the participants would be ensured, and payment. So Dr. Rowley had told about the difference between payment and medical management and compensation. So what amount needs to be paid for the participant for participating in your research, and compensation in terms of research related injuries, any social values, community considerations need to be thought of, and disclosure of conflict of interest. So these are the various aspects that broadly that need to be have in the investigators as well as the ethics committee have to have in mind while planning research. So the informed consent process is basically, we will not go into much of the detail. So it is voluntarily the participant gives their willingness to participate in this knowing about all the aspects of the study. So it's important to provide relevant information, and comprehension is it is important to make sure that the participant understands whatever information is provided, and based on that voluntarily agrees to be part of the study. So the informed consent document should be in simple layman language, and it has to be approved by the ethics committee. So return informed consent for the participant who's 18 years and above, and below that would be from the legally authorized representative. So at least the main element that it involves research, the duration of participation, what type of procedures need to be followed, what are the risks or discomfort anticipated, reasonable benefits expected from research, alternate procedures or therapies, how confidentiality would be maintained, and the treatment schedule and the probability for random assignment in case of trials, the financial compensation and the medical management, and explanation for whom contact, and then how the payment will be given to any participant, and the responsibilities of the participant's trial, statement that the participant is voluntary, and refusal to participate will not involve any penalty or loss of benefits, and statement that there is a possibility of failure of investigational product to provide intended therapeutic effect, and what would be the follow-up on that. And in case of placebo controlled trial, so placebo is something that would not cause any effect. So those kind of things have to be informed apart from any other pertinent information. So important when looking at your study population to identify whether they belong to any of the vulnerable groups which the ICMR ethical guidelines refers to as vulnerable. So they can be socially or economically or politically disadvantaged, like tribal population, sexual minorities, refugees, migrants, etc. And in terms of incapable of making a voluntary informed consent or decision for themselves, children, mentally ill and cognitively impaired people belong to the vulnerable group. And in case of voluntariness or their understanding is compromised due to their situation, the terminally patient and patients suffering from stigmatizing or rare diseases, they will fall into this group and unduly influenced either by expectation or benefits or fear or retaliation. They institutionalize under trials or prisoners, orphans. So these people, we know the basic ethical principle is autonomy. So you should get a well-informed, informed consent to them. But their capability of providing informed consent or ensuring the autonomy is compromised in these situations. So that mean we should not should not involve them in research is not the ultimate thing, but we should be involving them in research only if they will benefit. Like we should not use them just because prisoners are readily available because they are there in a enclosed setting and it's very quick and easy to finish the study. We should not be doing some study on them which will benefit others. Only if it is really beneficial for them, the study has to be done among vulnerable population. And since the autonomy is compromised, you have to empower them to the extent possible so that they can take their own decision. In this situation, legally acceptable representatives should be involved in decision making, and special care to ensure that privacy and confidentiality should be there, and right, safety and well-being of should be ensured by all stakeholders, which includes the investigators, ethics committees, sponsors, etc. So we have the national guidelines for biomedical research involving children. There is a separate guidelines for that, which has various features, and it has to be followed if children are being involved as research participants. And in terms of considering drugs or other interventions in clinical trials, patients should not be charged for any trial-related interventions or procedures. So everything should be free of cost as far as the research study goes, and you should have money to pay for all those investigations. Suppose you don't have it within them, you have to refer them to some hospital. You should bear those investigational charges. Any ancillary care like non-study or trial-related illness for common ailments, the study should be able to provide for that also. And it's very important to avoid therapeutic misconception. What is therapeutic misconception? So because a person, suppose we are doing research in, for example, a patient who's asthmatic, then the patient comes to the hospital for a treatment, but we are going to try a new drug for asthma among the patient. So when the patient is going and seeking treatment, there is a they cannot differentiate between what is research and what is treatment. So there is a therapeutic misconceptions there. So we need to clearly explain to the potential research participant about the distinction between research as well as treatment. And as far as possible, it is important to avoid therapeutic misconceptions. And it's very important that adverse effects of drugs are reported in a timely manner. Dr. Narendran told about the different timelines of reporting, and that has to be adhered to. So in academic trial, that timelines have to be adhered to while reporting to ethics committee. In regulatory trial for the reporting to the DCGI. And it is also very important that you have an insurance or corpus coverage in the institute also to pay for compensation. So either the sponsor pays or the institution should take responsibility of that. And then, of course, the other parameters like privacy and confidentiality has to be ensured. Conflict of interest has to be disclosed. Dr. Ruli had very detailedly and clearly explained about that. And post-trial access, suppose the drug is beneficial or the vaccine is beneficial, how to give it back to the study. So that kind of decision also has to be thought of prior to the start of the study, and any alternate treatment also. So if you're going to participate in my study, if you don't participate, you have this kind of treatment, it is available. So it is okay. So there is not a must to be a study participant to avail treatment. So that kind of things has to be explained. And most important, community engagement is very important, considering the potential study participants that the study is going to recruit. So payment for participation refers to reimbursement for expense like travel related expenses. You pay for their inconvenience, time spent, and incidental expenses. It can be cash or kind or both. And in terms of legally authorized representative, you need to reimburse them for travel and other incidental expenses. And it is very important that ethics committee must review and approve the payments to avoid undue inducement. And people can suffer harm as a result of participation in the research, so they are entitled to financial or other assistance. And in case of death, their dependents are entitled to financial compensation. So it's very important you have budgetary provision for insurance cover and as well as for compensation. So Dr. Narendran had detailedly mentioned about what qualifies for a study-related injury or disability. So if something has happened to a person, which is a death or a disability arising from all the following reasons, it's very important that compensation will definitely be to give. In case of adverse effect of the investigational product, violation or scientific misconduct, in case of failure of investigational product where you didn't provide a standard of care or rescue medication, adequate standard of care was not provided in the study, adverse effect due to concomitant medication, adverse effect for a child in utero because a parent participated in the clinical trial, and any clinical trial procedure which had related in that injury. So, how do we avoid these kind of injuries? So, we need to exclude participants who may be at high risk of injury in the clinical trial. You need to very carefully review the investigational procedure as well as the data on the IP. So, investigational products. So, what are the preclinical studies? What are the adverse events that were encountered in phase 1, phase 2 studies? What are the different adverse reactions? So, which type of population need to be included? So what are the safety measures or investigations that need to be in place to detect them early? So, and then careful monitoring of participants to manage adverse events is very important. And you should also have a backup facility, resources, and procedures for immediate resuscitation and maintenance of life support if something like adverse event happens to a participant in the study. So these are the things that one has to consider to minimize the risk to study participants. And clinical trial, which include vaccines. So vaccines can contain an active or live attenuated microorganism. So in case of live attenuated, they can possibly cause infection itself, and the participant need to be informed about that. And we have the control group. So provision should be made to provide free treatment for disease and post-trial access. If the vaccine is effective, the control group subsequently should receive that vaccine, and recombinant DNA vaccines and products, applicable governmental guidelines and regulations should be followed. And in terms of study designs, if the study is blinded, and so ethics committee can ask or for unblinding, so mechanism should be available to the researcher a priori. So if an SAE occurs, how the unblinding would be done, and the so when in terms of use of placebo, when can we use it is when there is no effective therapy that is available. So if an effective therapy is available and one is using placebo, it's very unethical, and ethics committee should review the placebo control study designs very critically and make sure that placebos are used and the instances at no effective therapy is available. So protocol must have additional safeguards to protect participants from harm, that when you will withdraw them, monitoring and in terms of rescue medications. So sometimes trials are designed in such a way the common standard of care is given, and then IP investigational product or placebo are added on to the existing care. So these are add-on trial designs where placebos are used without much risk, and fewer patients can be randomized to placebo arm, having 2:1 randomization. And in case of positive trial results, it's also important to make sure that transition to standard of care or active medicine is there for these participants. In terms of pregnancy and clinical, so it is very like when we are looking into the investigational product, it is very important to see whether it can cause any teratogenicity to the unborn child. So women of childbearing age, they must be counseled for effective contraceptive methods if we are very unsure of something like that could happen. And in case of inadvertent pregnancy while in the trial, the participant has to be withdrawn from the study and they must be followed up for both the mother as well as the fetus have to be followed for outcome. So whether the child was born normal or not, until then is our responsibility to follow up a person who gets pregnant in the study. So risk benefit assessment has to be done at all stages for the mother and the fetus. And suppose a woman is nursing and we should not be asking them to stop lactating for the sake of participation in research. So in case of, there are sponsors and investors. Sponsor is someone who authorizes the protocol as well as funds it. And in case of investigator-initiated study, investigator has a dual responsibility of investigator as well as the sponsor. Financial arrangements have to be made by the institution and the investigator, where to get funds from the funding agency. All that has to be planned a priori, because for the issues of payment as well as compensation in terms of clinical trials. And it's also important that the institution has policies to ensure quality of data generated and safety of the intervention. And if students are conducting clinical trials as part of academic thesis, the guide and the academic institution should take up the responsibilities of the sponsor. So it's also important to have a corpus fund in the institute for this kind of research if it's happening, and as well as to seek for funds from funding agencies. So in terms of collaborative research, Dr. Narendran had detailedly mentioned about collaboration or internal collaborations, ownership of materials and data, intellectual property rights, joint publications, how do we manage the research findings, conflict of interest, and commercializing the research outcomes. All these aspects have to be considered in terms of collaborative research. And MOU is very important when multiple institutes are coming together to conduct a study. So there are a lot of applicable rules. Most important for clinical trials is the New Drugs and Clinical Trial Rules 2019, the medical device rules, as well as the ICMR. So most of the clinical trial ethical related aspects are from ICMR. Ethical Guidelines 2017, and for specific aspects we need to look for any regulations that govern that kind of research. And in terms of Ayush, also there is clinical practice guidelines for Ayush, which can be referred to for alternate system of medicine. And Dr. Rowley had already mentioned about ICMR policy on research integrity and publication ethics. So it's very important that this document is read by all researchers. And while in the planning stage itself, all the aspects of this in terms of maintaining integrity in data collection, analysis, and reporting, and how do we publish and disseminate, all those things are discussed a priori, which avoids a lot of confrontations once a study is completed. So the take-home messages are basically autonomy, beneficence, and justice to be upheld in any type of research that one is planning, and the right, safety, and well-being of research participants has to be ensured. Ethical review has to be done prior to initiation of the study. Privacy and confidentiality of the research participants have to be ensured. And you need to set in additional safeguards for vulnerable population. Think of compensation for research-related harms. Avoid therapeutic misconception as far as clinical trials are concerned. And it's always a good practice to refer to regulations and existing guidelines. So thank you very much. And with this, I end my talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for sharing your expertise and valuable insights with us.
Okay.
Ma'am, there's a question from our participant. Shall I ask you?
Yeah, yes.
It is, How can we obtain approval for retrospective clearance for clinical studies?
So I think Dr. Rowley covered it in her presentation that there are different types of review which ethics committee do based on the risk involved, like exempt review, expedited review, and full board review. For research that is already done or on data which is already collected, generally we do an expedited review. So the data has to be anonymized and it is circulated among ethics committee members. So maybe Dr. Rowley also can add to this.
So I understood the question was that can we do can you please repeat the question? Retrospective, yeah.
How can we obtain approval for retrospective clearance for clinical studies?
Yeah. So correct. I understood it correctly. I just wanted to clarify. There is nothing like a retrospective approval, it's unethical. The research ethics approval has to be prospective. So before a research study begins, an approval has to be obtained, right? Before you begin any clinical, biomedical research, any kind of research. So a lot of time what happens is students, when they reach the stage of publication and the journal asks for an ethics approval, then they come back to the ethics committee that, my study and such a big study, great work, and I can't publish. And they ask for retrospective approvals, which is unethical on the part of the ethics committee to give. Okay, so that is one thing. The second thing, because that's why I asked you for the question, is that you already have some data which was collected before, and you want to do a retrospective analysis of that data, right? So if that is the question, then that can be done with proper permission. Like you can prepare a proposal that, such and such data or set is available, and this is my aims and objectives, and this is the methodology, and I would like to do a analysis of the data which was collected earlier. So that also needs an ethics approval prospectively.
Ma'am, shall I come in?
Please, Dr. Gupta.
Since today I have taken the side of the investigators, so I will say two things. One is, if you have two of these mandates, like what Madam has said, there's nothing called
We lost you, Dr. Nand.
retrospective approval. Two of the mandates.
Sorry,
it's very
we lost
clear.
you actually.
Am I correct?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am. Two of these mandates. One is, like what Madam said, any de-identified data analysis alone, and then you put the next line that which has got no direct relationship to the management of the patient currently. If you do that, you can go for an expedited approval, saying that this idea was not known before. We want to do this. It's called ad hoc analysis, or you can say retrospective analysis, or additional analysis, or cross protocol analysis, whatever you want to do. But if you have if you breach these two clauses where I'm going to identify the patient, or it has a bearing on the patient's management currently, again, it has to go for submission, and again, it has to be prospectively approved.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, ma'am. I hope our participants would have received a good clarity. So as we conclude this enriching session, I would like to invite Dr. P.K. Mishra, sir, to deliver a vote of thanks. Sir, please.
Thank you, Samriddhi. On behalf of the director, ICMR Nire Bhopal, and the entire organizing team, I want to express my gratitude to Roli Mathur ma'am, Dr. Narendran Gopalan, and Dr. V.V. Banurekha for sharing their valuable insights today. Your phenomenal expertise played a pivotal role in the success of the event. I wish to also thank Dr. Manoj Murekar sir for suggesting the names of Dr. Gopalan and Dr. Banurekha. I deeply appreciate the unwavering support from our senior administrative officer, engineering services team, and the IT team, including Mrs. Grisma, Associate Engineer Mr. Abhinav, for their instrumental assistance in the IT-related work. Your contributions were crucial for the smooth conduction of the event. I also extend my special thanks to Ms. Samriddhi Singh, Scientist B, and the host of the event for exceptional hosting of the program. Well done, Samriddhi. We are extremely proud of you. Lastly, I would like to thank more than 1124 registered participants and the entire ICMR NIRE family for their active participation in the deliberations. We eagerly anticipate your presence at our future academic interactions focusing on contemporary health science topics. Thank you for your continued support. Jai Hind, Namaskar.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this opportunity. Actually, I had left some time in my talk because I thought we'll have discussions, and but I think the participants are mostly online, so we would. But it's fine. If there are more questions, we can.
Samriddhi, is there any question left from the participant side? Maybe we can ask Rolima Thur ma'am.
There's one more question. Shall I ask?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah.
For you.
Is it necessary for institutions to approve RCTs at the local level when they are centrally funded by ICMR headquarters?
Sure. I think Dr. Banu Rekha would also like to reply to that. Otherwise, I will do that. So yes, the ethics committee is at the local institutional level. ICMR in that case would be the funding agency, or like a kind of a sponsor for that study, or we don't call. There's a slight distinguishment that has to be made between funder and sponsor. ICMR is a funder for a grant application, but ICMR does not undertake an ethics review of that grant. ICMR does a scientific review to see whether it is in line with ICMR's mandate and of promotion of biomedical research in particular areas. So the grant is approved on the basis of that. But the ethics review is slightly different ballgame, where we see from the participants' perspective, how is the study going to be relevant to the population on which the study is to be conducted. So that review is to be conducted at the local institutional level where the study has to begin. So even if ICMR has approved a grant, it also means that it will additionally have to undergo an ethics review at that site. Thanks.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. We are done with the questions.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, everyone.
It's lovely to be there. Bye.
Bye.
The recording has stopped.